So I want to talk about why the Russians use power and violence when they don't have to necessarily, but they do. Like this is the default. And my mind was going about this from other things, and I'll try to piece together how I got to where I am. So the other day, Jonathan Fink reached out to me and said, "Hey, could you, push this video? It's one of my best, and it's not getting a lot of traction, which is unfortunate. Only 10,000 views. Volodymyr Yerlimenko: Why Russia Attacks Its Neighbors." And I'm only going to show you this one little part, and I'll link the rest of the video below if you want to watch that and try to understand what he's talking about. But at a certain point, he talks about, Russia just chooses violence. Now, we get it wrong when we in the West think that, well, if the Russians, they're just misunderstood. Maybe we're the ones causing them to be violent or causing them to do this. No, no, no. This is their default. This is a feature, not a bug. It's not because we did anything or we're escalating, so they're going to do this. This is how they're going to be. And to understand that, like some time ago, I highlighted one video where the speaker was talking about it was actually pretty brilliant. Like they kind of missed the Enlightenment, or they kind of missed like the Cold War shut down, and they never were retrained out of a Cold War mentality. And so they still think in these old Soviet kind of power, we've just got to fight terms. And you see this when you look at propaganda as well. When you look at Russian propaganda, it's always, we're going to nuke you this, or we're going to bomb London or submerge, all of Britain, or, all the West can go eat our nuclear weapons, or it's that kind of mentality. So what's going on here? And I'm trying to I understand the what, I don't understand exactly the why, but I do know this. When I was in Eastern Europe in 2001 to 2000, on and off a few times in four former Soviet bloc countries, either former Soviet or Warsaw Pact countries that were influenced by the Soviet Union. I found it really interesting that when I was talking about, so I was in my graduate program, and my PhD is in organizational leadership. And the way that people will pick up that conversation in the United States is different than it was when I was over in Eastern Europe. In Eastern Europe, they thought of leadership in kind of dangerous terms. And you'll understand why when you see this clip in just a moment. It's like leadership is not a good thing. Like here, I think of leadership as, how do I help my followers get where they're trying to get to in a way that is going to be efficient and effective, and that's going to move them there in the proper way, not because you better do it or else, but because I'm inspiring them, helping them be more efficient, helping empower them to get where they're trying to go. That's very different than what they thought of leadership. They thought of leadership in terms of some official from the government is coming to do something to you or tell you what to do, or very bad things can happen if you don't do it the way I say, or that sort of thing. And it was really interesting. Like the first time I was in Lithuania, this was in 2001, they were talking about like some crazy stuff. Like they weren't happy with, I don't remember if it was the president or prime minister, but they weren't happy with one of them. I think it was the president. And we're like, well, if we just had one good leader, like, no, that's a backwards way of thinking about it. But this is the way they would tend to think. Okay, so here he's talking about power and violence and why they choose violence. So let's hear what he has to say here and try to unpack these thoughts.
Understood, of course, going into this war, understanding this war, but is that, look, Russians are using violence not for military purposes, but rather for power purposes. Like they're using violence to show that they are the boss.
They're using violence to show that they're the boss. And it's the same kind of thinking that would make them say, see, I won this election with 88% of the vote. Nobody wins an election with 88% of the vote. That never happens. But see, I'm the boss. I'm in charge. It's that mentality. And I'm not sure how to break the mentality, but I know it's there. And I know that this is what's happening. And so they overdo this violence. They don't use, like in martial arts, you're taught to use the least force necessary in order to achieve the objective, to win the fight, to be done with it, whatever. They just want to keep pounding and pounding and pounding and pounding, right? It's a very different mentality.
And this is violence when they're bombarding cities, and this is violence when they're shooting at civilian cars. This is violence there when they're doing torture. And if you understand that the violence for them is not a tool to even to exterminate the enemy, but a tool to assert the very sadistic domination, you kind of understand what kind of power they have in mind. Because
so I don't think we're getting away from this, and I don't think that anything you do to appease it, to not escalate, or to do so, the only thing that they understand then is force meeting force. You need greater force to show, you know what, this isn't a good idea.
They don't have the conception of power as authority, for example.
And that line grabbed me. So there's power and there's authority, and they don't think of power as authority. Like so in the United States, like we think of power emanating from authority, right? If I have the power, if I'm a cop and I have the power to stop you, it's not because I have the power because I held my hand out and said stop, or even that I have a gun. It's the badge that I'm wearing that is the authority that leads to the power, because much more power can flow. But they don't really think in terms of the authority so much as I can do this to you, and it's it's something different.
Like I have power because I don't know, I people just listen to me, or they think that I'm wise or whatever. No, their conception of power is violence. The connection between these two is very, very important. And
power as violence, and that's what they're wreaking on Ukraine right now. So this could have gone very, very differently. So instead of crossing the border with tanks, what would have happened if they had wooed Ukraine back into the fold? You know what? We know you're different. You're your own people. You have your own language. You have your own whatever. But we want to make a deal. We want to, we want to sell you oil cheaper. We want to sell you electricity cheaper. We want to trade with you more. That sort of thing. But they weren't thinking in terms of how do we trade? How do we get along? How do we whatever? Terms was, how do I get you to knuckle under and do what I tell you to do? And the Ukrainians were having an allergic reaction to that for many, many years. And since 2014, certainly, maybe before that with the Orange Revolution.
And therefore, when you understand it, you understand differently how they will react and what to do with them. Because in their mindset, the cruel person, and I also read it on Facebook 1 week ago, the cruel person, how you say it in English, I know the French word, le bourreau, the executioner, right? The person who cuts your head. So while in the Western European, Central European cultures, Eastern European, this executioner is always kind of a person who should be placed on the borders of the society because he's not clean, and he's always dealing with death, and he lives outside of the city. He probably doesn't have wife or kids, whatever, because he's dealing with death. You better go away from him. So in the Russian society, you see that this executioner, the very violent figure, is in the center of the society.
Yeah, doesn't that change things radically? Like this, the violence, that mentality, the force, it's something that they aspire to. Now, this is really interesting to me too, because I was watching over the Christmas break, I was watching a Great Courses thing about the Great Courses videos about the history of Russia, just out of my own curiosity. I'm just seeing where I could fill in my gaps. And one of the things that was really interesting was, like, you had like Ivan the Terrible. There's no analog for Ivan the Terrible in the American experience. Like you can say what you want to say, oh, Trump is bad or whatever. We don't have that kind of thing. Or Peter the Great's sadistic nature. We don't have that. Like we revile that kind of character. But they don't. They hold this up. They regard it as, see, he was powerful, Ivan the Terrible, right? Peter the Great. It's just something's very different here. And I'm not sure that I've pieced anything together, but I know that this is a core strut of who they are and why they're going to act as they're going to act. And I don't expect the leopard to change his spots. I expect them to continue to act this way until they are shocked out of it like the Nazis were and the Japanese were after World War II. And because the USSR imploded and they never had to repudiate their ideology and they just kind of carried on as USSR 2.0 as Russia, with Russian nationalism replacing the Soviet communism or Marxist Leninism. They just kept going on. It's still in there. It's still deep in the psyche. All right, that's all that I have to say. I don't know if my own meanderings here, my own just trying to sort this out, has been helpful to you. If it has, let me know in the comments. If you can add anything to it and help me understand more of the why that's there, I'd like to do that as well. All right, thank you, my friends. Thank you for the time. Thank you for the likes and the shares and the subscribes. And thank you for being the kind of person that cares about Ukraine.